ஆல் இண்டியா ரேடியோ செய்திக்கதம்பம். தமிழகத்தில் சிறப்பு பொருளாதார மண்டலங்கள் மூலம் ஏற்றுமதியை மேம்படுத்துதல் தொடர்பான கருத்தரங்கம் சென்னையில் நடைபெற்றது. இதில் கலந்து கொண்டு பேசினார் தமிழக அரசின் தொழில்துறை கூடுதல் தலைமைச் செயலாளர் திரு எஸ். கிருஷ்ணன். அவர் பேசும்போது,
Let me ask, as a state government, why is it important that we even have an export strategy? And why is it important that we participate in this overall effort of exports? A lot of the history of special economic zones and export processing zones, which is based on a number of other factors, is based on the way trade relations are organized between countries. It's based on how we look at the entire way that trade operates between countries in terms of customs barriers, in terms of high tariffs, in terms of the difficulty of moving, in terms of the lack of free movement of goods. And which is why you try to find ways in which you can deal with this issue. Similarly, exports and imports trade and the balance of trade becomes very vital in terms of establishing the competitiveness of an economy. If you're competitive, you're able to export. Your exports or what you produce in your country are significantly cheaper than what is produced elsewhere, and you are in a position to make sure that your goods are bought all over the world. India has been part of this globalization business for years and years and years. And all of you are aware, when we talk about archaeology in Tamil Nadu, Arikamedu and various other places, Korkai around Tuticorin, all of these places which have always been involved in trade and commerce globally. But if you look at the economic history of the period, which comes out through various pieces of archaeological evidence, various other elements of what you can find, was probably at its most prosperous in some senses in these periods where you didn't have very strong centralized governments, but you had a lot of trade and you had a lot of vibrant economic relations across the world. And I think that is very important to register. Likewise, if you look at southern India, 1080, Chola Empire was at its peak, was a period where you had considerable trade relations and economy of this particular part of the country was particularly vibrant. I point this out fundamentally to point out that the whole idea of SEZs, etc. are fundamentally a temporary mechanism which we try to create enclaves which somehow make production in the country more competitive. You try to do a variety of things which reduce friction costs, which reduce transaction costs, which enable easier inputs. All of these with a view of making our exports competitive. But all of these are short-term measures. Ultimately, we need to make our economy competitive. Wherever I produce, whichever industry which is to establish, you need to be competitive globally. The best quality that you produce in this country is intended for export. So I think it's important to realize that, high quality and cost-effective competitive production is something we need to aspire for regardless of what happens. And the test of figuring out whether you're competitive and whether you produce quality is to figure out whether you can actually export. If you can't export and nobody else will buy your stuff, then you're not there. Which is why what as a country we should be attempting to is do all bits of this exercise to make sure that we produce high quality commodities, high quality merchandise at competitive prices. And I think we can feel justifiably proud that what we produce in the state for export is both high quality and it is competitively priced, and which is precisely why you are able to do it. And that is the success which we need to replicate, regardless of whether you do it in an SEZ or whether you do it outside an SEZ. So I think this is important from the perspective of making sure that we are a competitive economy which can produce for the world. And that is what Tamil Nadu aims to do. Industrial policy, typically if you looked at economic policy, and so I asked this bunch of big economists, Nobel Prize winners, saying that, tell me, how do I determine this? Industrial policy is back to stay. Everyone is talking industrial policy. Now, how do I pick which industry to back and which industry not to? Test again is, are you export competitive? If the industry you're picking to back is export competitive, then automatically you picked a winner. You picked the right industry because you are able to do it efficiently and you are able to do it at low cost and deliver high quality. So that, for us, is why export competitiveness, the ability to export and what you export is important in the way we formulate industrial policy and in determining which are the industries which you tend to back as part of what the government wants to get done. Better jobs, higher quality jobs, higher paying jobs for the people of the state. It's a direct proposition. It's a simple equation that we want the people from the state to get better jobs. And that is the only reason why, as a government, we are interested. That is a welfare objective which we are concerned with, which to push towards in terms of what requires to happen for the exports to really take off. So the point that the SEZ Act came out in 2005 and 6, I was very much in the finance ministry. You can't be giving export subsidies to export, and which is precisely the argument that countries make against some other large exporting entities or exporting countries. And this is something that India also has raised at WTO and various other quarters, saying that what is happening is dumping and exports are being subsidized by some other countries to come in here at a very cheap rate. That's an argument that very often industries, even in India, keep raising. Therefore, I think contours of this whole thing, in that sense, I think this discussion would have been considerably enriched if we had had the presence of people from the Customs Department as well, in terms of how they look at this issue. If I manufacture something and if it is intended for export, it needs to get out of my factory and be in the air in 2 hours flat. That is what many of them actually tell us, saying that these are the standards we want to keep. The other big issue you would have, especially which I think we can now resolve, is the whole problem with exports is that you cannot export taxes. This whole idea of duty drawbacks, the whole idea of giving back input taxes, all of it is linked to the simple concept that from one economy to another economy, you don't export taxes, because if you did, you are uncompetitive. And in any case, it's not your citizenry which is buying those goods. Somebody else is buying them in some other country, and they will pay the tax. And likewise, we will pay the taxes on the imports which come into our country, and that's how it evens. So when we cannot export taxes, hopefully if the GST supply chains are maintained effectively and the entire GST supply chain comes in and we are able to resolve all these issues in the GST network and make sure that the export refunds of tax take place promptly and completely without breaking that value chain, that in itself, to a great extent, will eliminate this problem of whether you're in a free trade area, whether you're in a duty-free area, whether you're in a SEZ area or in a domestic tariff area. That issue can, to a very large extent, be eliminated. Are not looking only at the international market to export. They are looking at domestic sales as well. They are looking at, we have to recognize that we are a very large market, and that in itself is a big attraction for people to manufacture in India. And so when you say make in India, it is fundamentally make for India. That is, you make for the Indian market and you make for the overseas market as well. So when you're looking at that concept, I think it's very important that we sort of draw up our rules in a way that chasing the rules itself doesn't become an objective, and we are able to have a transparent mechanism by which we are able to resolve these issues. And that also requires a lot of cooperation from exporter community, from the people who are engaged in this manufacture, that the objective claiming a duty drawback should not become the objective of exporting itself, which is also a well-known phenomenon of how it has played out in the past. So, I mean, we need to, what we export is of quality and what we export is of value to our final buyers, and that's how you establish reputations in markets. And similarly, what we import is not harmful to the country, and what we import is of material which is genuinely of use.
இத்துடன் இன்றைய செய்திக் கதம்பம் நிறைவு பெறுகிறது.